Hi guys, it's Kathy. I hope you're doing well. So we're going to continue with the Kelly trial today. We're on day 2, afternoon. So this is after they took their break. Here we go. I wonder how many of you have cheated and know the outcome. Don't cheat if you don't know.
Please rise if you prefer. Thank you. Everyone, please be seated.
Bet you there's vodka in that cup.
All right, we're back on the record. The record will show the presence of all jurors, counsel, and the defendant. And the state can call its next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Agent Morcell.
Hello, Agent Marcel.
By the way, sir, have a seat over here, please.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please tell the jury your name and your occupation?
Yes, Jeremy Scott Morcell. I'm a United States Border Patrol agent.
And Agent Morcell, could you tell the jury just a little bit about your background?
Sure, I EOD'd. I entered on duty with the United States Border Patrol March 27th of 2008. Upon completing
You're gonna have to slow down.
Okay. Upon entering on duty, I attended the United States Border Patrol Academy in Artesia, New Mexico for approximately 5 months. There, I learned things like immigration law, nationality law, defense tactics, arrest techniques, firearms. Upon graduating from the Border Patrol Academy,
Can I
approximately
stop you for a
August,
second? How long did you say that academy was?
approximately 5 months.
5 months, okay.
Yes.
And then what did you do next?
Upon graduating, then I came to Nogales Border Patrol Station, where we attended a field training unit for approximately 8 weeks. There again, we did more firearms training, arrest techniques, physical techniques. We learned actually how to do certain assignments. We worked with a senior agent approximately for those 8 weeks. Area orientation, kind of learned the area that we'd be working in Nogales.
And what types of special assignments did you learn?
We learned how to do line watch, static positions.
Can you
watching-
tell us, let me stop you for a sec. What's line watch?
So line watch is a static position where we're actually in strategic points along the border, actually watching the fence, high traffic areas to prevent entries from Mexico into the United States.
And then what other types of things do you learn?
Roving patrol, it's kind of like a secondary, it's a backup to line watch. We rove around the area and respond to traffic that's actually already entered in the United States.
And any other specific duties that you learned at that time?
Checkpoint operations. We have a checkpoint, kilometer post 40, Interstate 19, the checkpoint operations there as well. Processing, we do files on subject that we have already arrested, whether we're going to deport them, set them up for asylum, or return them to their country voluntarily.
Any other major assignments?
That's about it for.
Okay. Now I know that the Border Patrol recently sort of reorganized and you're now part of another group. Is that right?
We're currently under Customs and Border Protection with our customs officers as well.
Okay. So Customs and Border Protection officers and Border Patrol, I think we generally call you green shirts and blue shirts. Is that right?
Sure.
Okay, is that a common way
It's
that
pretty,
people?
it's pretty common, yes.
Yeah, okay. And I see you're wearing a green shirt, so
Yes,
you're with the green shirts,
I am.
and that's the Border Patrol, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And then Customs and Border Protection, those are the folks that wear the blue uniforms?
So yes, the customs officers, yes, they actually wear the blue and work at the ports of entry.
Okay, so you said they work at the ports of entry. Can you tell me what the difference is in your mission between Customs and Border Protection and then Border Patrol?
Sure, their mission is actually, they inspect people as well as cargo that's entering the United States from a designated port of entry, whether it's land, sea, water, where the Border Patrol, we work between ports of entry up to approximately 100 air miles north of the border. So we actually patrol around these ports of entry between them. Anything that's already illegally entered the United States that's not at a port of entry, that's we enforce.
So CBP, their ports of entry, you guys are everything else up to 100 miles of the border.
Excuse me a second. You're signaling, you can't hear well?
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you for letting me know. It's good.
Can you hear me okay? Or is it just the agent? Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So we're talking about the different duties between the Border Patrol and the Customs and Border Protection. And you said, so does that mean y'all take care of the checkpoints as well?
We do, yes, ma'am. That's Border Patrol.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about your employment history with the Border Patrol after you finished your training?
Okay, so upon completing the Border Patrol Academy, as well as the field training unit, I was on a probationary period for approximately 2 years. Upon completing that probationary period, I was able to obtain certifications and put in for specialty details. So I was certified on the all-terrain vehicle unit. I was confined space entry certified. I was certified on multiple less lethal devices that we carry in the field. I was certified as a level 2 rope rescue technician, as well as certified to conduct oral hiring boards for new hires that we hire for the Border Patrol. And along with those certifications, then I'm able to put in for certain details. Like I spent several years on the ATV unit, as well as the mountain team unit. We work kind of the outskirts of Nogales' area, as well as a flex team, kind of operate the same thing on the outskirts of Nogales' area of responsibility. It's pretty about it for certifications.
And what types of assignments have you had then? You talked about ATVs, mountain unit. Did you say mounted unit?
Mountain, like
Mountain
a mountain team.
unit.
Yes, we work kind of on the Datascosa Mountains, Mount Washington, kind of the high areas on the flanks of Nogales' area. Yes, the flex team, the checkpoint. I spent several months at the checkpoint working there as well. Just on the patrol groups, patrolling, doing the line watch, the processing as well.
At some point, did you move to an assignment called the ranch liaison
Yes,
position?
ma'am. I spent 18 months on the ranch liaison detail under public affairs. Yes, ma'am.
How are you currently assigned?
I am currently assigned to the I-19 checkpoint.
And so what time frame was the 18 months that you were assigned to the ranch liaison position?
So I was on the ranch liaison from October of 2021 till approximately the end of March, early April of 2023.
Is that typically an 18-month assignment?
It is, yes, ma'am. Some of our details you're able to extend, but some there's a straight flat time you're not able to extend.
So on January 30th of 2023, would that have been your assignment as the ranch liaison?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you tell the jury a little bit about what a ranch liaison does?
Sure. The ranch liaison, we fall under the public affairs, so we work a lot with the community. Specifically, we work with ranchers and property owners along the southern border, specifically in Nogales Border Patrol areas of responsibility. We're there to establish and also maintain positive working relationships with ranchers as well as property owners that own property on the southern border that we work. We routinely communicate with the ranchers and property owners to just keep them up to date what is kind of going on their property, immigration related, and what we're kind of enforcing as well as they reach out to us, anything that they may be seeing as well.
So maybe you said this and I got a little distracted there for a minute, but did you indicate part of that mission has to do with making sure you have access for your operations?
Yeah, that's kind of a vital role of the ranch liaison to make sure, since we're by law able to enter on properties within 25 miles of the border, some of it's private property. So to maintain access, smoothly into these properties, we kind of maintain a positive relationship with them to allow us to place locks on their gates or no locks at all. We assist with replacing gates with cattle guards to kind of alleviate any issues of gates being left open. Helps with kind of our response time as well.
And you talked about, maintaining that good relationship. Is part of that helping them when there are issues with having to cut fences for access and things like that?
Yeah, so the ranch liaison they will assist with actually mending the fences that are cut. So if sometimes our horse patrol or ATVs will have to cut a fence to respond into traffic. There's no way to actually get to that traffic. There's not a gate close by. To actually get on the other side of the fence with the horses or the ATV, they may have to cut it. So they'll reach out to me to actually fix it, or they'll fix it themselves, or we'll notify the ranchers that we have had to make a cut in the fence.
So is the idea then kind of to keep good PR with those folks so
Yes,
that you
ma'am.
have a good relationship with them?
Yes, ma'am.
And you talked a little bit about the communication that you have with the ranchers. What's the purpose of communicating with them? How do you communicate with them?
So the main purpose is safety. We're constantly patrolling on these properties that they ranch. So the main concern is safety. I actually use a government issued phone that's assigned to the ranch liaison unit. So I have a government issued phone that's assigned to me, and that's how we kind of communicate, is through text messages or phone calls, just so to make them aware if we are working in the area. That way there's no interference, there's no safety concerns, no surprises. If they know we're working in the area, they may stay out of the area for a little bit that way, especially since we use air support a lot, helicopters that fly overhead. If someone would be on horseback working, cattle, we don't want to spook their horses with the helicopter. So just a friendly text or a phone call saying, hey, the border patrol is going to be in the area working a group, say. They might just stay out of the area. Maybe if they're working near that area, they'll just come back another time when we have cleared and we're finished with our operations.
Okay. So generally the idea then is just to keep folks away from your operations. Is that what the communication is for?
Yes, ma'am.
And then you kind of sometimes get that information flows the other direction as well, right?
Yes, ma'am. They'll call us as well saying, if they feel comfortable notifying us, they'll let us know if they see any traffic, immigration related or narcotics related. They'll give us a heads up on that as well.
Okay. Now, in January of 2023, in your professional capacity, did you know a property owner named George Allen Kelly?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know where his ranch was located?
Yes, ma'am.
Where was it located?
On the east side of Nogales, Arizona, near Keno Springs.
Is that in Santa Cruz County?
Yes, ma'am.
You talked about Nogales Border Patrol area that you all are responsible for.
Yes, ma'am.
What area is that?
So we go from downtown Nogales area, Arizona. We go as far east as Mount Washington, which would be Sonoyta. If you look to the east of downtown Nogales, if you see that big mountain out there, that's Mount Washington. That's kind of our seam. The top of that mountain is kind of our seam to the far east. We go as far west as Arivaca, if you're familiar with that. And then we go as far north as.
I'm not familiar with that, but that seems like a large area to cover, doesn't it? Okay, I don't know how large it is. I have no clue, but it just sounds like it's a large area.
As pretty far as Green Valley, Arizona.
So Mr. Kelly's property is within the Nogales Station, Border Patrol Station area, is that
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
And was he someone you knew in your capacity as a ranch liaison?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you tell us what name did Mr. Kelly ask you to call him?
Alan, I believe. I called him Mr. Kelly. Is kind of
Okay.
refer to him
But he would refer to himself as Alan sometimes.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
And did you ever meet Mr. Kelly in person?
I did. Yes, ma'am.
And could you tell the jury a little bit about when you first met Mr. Kelly?
So when I first met Mr. Kelly, I don't remember what time of year it was. He was out of town when I took over the ranch liaison and driving around with the former ranch liaison. He was unavailable. So I had reached out to him probably several weeks after that. We met at his property. He just kind of gave me a tour of the property there, kind of pointed out some areas.
And did you have some communication with him by phone?
We did. Yes, ma'am.
Did you have him in your phone as a contact?
I did. Yes,
Someone
ma'am.
you regularly reached out to?
Yes, ma'am.
And was that for things like you just described, to let him know about operational things that were happening and things of that nature?
Yes, ma'am.
Now I want to move forward to the events of January 30th of 2023. Could you tell the jury what were you doing that day when the events began involving this case?
So when the events actually began at 2:30 p.m., I was actually changing out. I was at my locker, changing out, getting ready to go home when I received the phone call.
And you received a phone call at what time?
2:30 p.m.
And what do you recall what number you received that from?
It was a number that was not saved in my contacts. It was 520604, and I don't remember the last four, but it was a number not saved in my contacts.
Did you document that in your report?
I did, yes, ma'am.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a few minutes for the phone number. But when you got that call at 2:30, you said you were.
Can we go back real quick?
Sure.
I don't think I documented the actual telephonic number, the actual number in my report.
Okay. It was on your phone log, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you got the call at 2:30, you said you were changing out. Tell us what you were doing.
I was at my locker, changing into gym clothes to work out.
Okay. And when you got that call, who was the call from?
Mr. Alan Kelly.
And could you tell the jury about the call?
So upon answering the phone, it was Mr. Kelly right away. He seemed very rushed and a little frantic at the call. He said, "Jeremy, I'm being shot at. I'm shooting back." I said, "Mr. Kelly, are you okay?" And he stated that he was unable to talk at that time. So I told Mr. Kelly I would call the station, send agents out there.
And did he tell you anything else about what he was observing at that moment?
At that time, he observed 5 subjects running southbound.
And did he say what they were running with?
Packs.
And what was his tone like?
It was pretty rushed. It sounded like he was exerting himself, kind of frantic.
Did you, and you said you knew it was Mr. Kelly. How did you know it was Mr. Kelly?
Just by his accent, his tone, has a very distinct voice. The way he says my name, the way he talks.
So you recognized his
I
voice?
recognized his voice. Yes, ma'am.
Could we have the screen, please? I'm going to just show you, and you let me know if I got this accurate. Could you turn it off again? Sorry, we're having the same problem. Sorry, the system keeps defaulting. 1 sec.
It's always technology. You get into it, technology ruins the story. I want to hear that other lawyer get back up again.
Does that look accurate on what you just told me the statements were that Mr. Kelly gave you that day?
Yes, ma'am.
You're under permission to display. It's as if I'm writing on the whiteboard.
All right. Permission granted. So this is what we call a demonstrative exhibit. The other exhibits that are presented and admitted into evidence are in evidence. And any exhibit that's admitted into evidence, you'll have available to you in the jury room. This is not something that's admitted into evidence. It's demonstrative exhibit. It's just a guide that a lawyer can use to just help you understand the evidence better. But as I said, any exhibit that's been admitted into evidence, and there have been some so far, will be available to you in the jury room when you go back to deliberate. So yes, you already have it up. Good.
Thank you. Agent Morcell, after you got this call from Mr. Kelly, what did you do?
I immediately called the Nogales Border Patrol Station to report it.
You were already in the Nogales Border Patrol
I
Station?
was, but we have such a large facility, and be honest, I was in my underwear when he called, and it's just more feasible to just make a phone call to the radio room. We have such a large facility. I mean, if I hear somebody's being shot at, I want to get agents out there as soon as possible. So I just transferred the call to Nogales Border Patrol Station, even though I was, in the facility.
And when you said transferred the call, you mean you called? You didn't
I
transfer
called.
Mr. Kelly, right?
No, ma'am, I called.
And when you said in
So
your
when you called
underwear,
and you reported it, what did you ask them to do?
To send agents to the Vermilion Mountain Ranch. Mr. Kelly reported that he was being shot at.
And did you have some conversation with someone in dispatch and make sure that was happening?
I did. I talked to a Border Patrol agent, Joshua Terces, who I spoke with.
And did you ask them to do anything else in terms of, did you just ask them to send out Border Patrol or did you ask for something else as well?
I asked for Border Patrol as well as the Sheriff's Department. Especially since sometimes we're not available, get sheriffs there as well.
And after you made that call to the station and you knew that was all underway, what did you do next?
After I spoke with the station, I called Mr. Kelly back to check on his welfare.
And what time was that call?
That was at 2:36 p.m.
And when you called him back, what was his demeanor like during that call?
This time he was a little calmer. He didn't seem as rushed. Still kind of adrenaline filled, I would say, but he was a little more calmer this time. He was able to speak.
And what did he tell you was happening at this time? Or what did he tell you during this phone call?
This time he stated that he had saw 5 subjects walking northbound with packs towards Keno Springs. I proceeded to ask Mr. Kelly if he was being shot at, and at this time he said he had heard a gunshot and saw his horse walking by or running by frantically. And at the time, it kind of sounded like he was inspecting the horse, and I believe he even stated that his horse doesn't appear to be shot. I asked Mr. Kelly if he had seen any firearms on the subjects that he saw running so I could notify the station and give the agents responding an update. At this time, he stated that it was too far to tell if they had firearms.
Does that accurately summarize the 2:36 call?
Yes, ma'am.
So I just want to make sure I get this right. The first call at 2:30, he says they're running southbound.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that right? And then the second call, he says they're running toward Keno Springs.
He had stated they were running towards Keno Springs, and he also stated that he wasn't sure if they were, I can't remember if he said doubling back or circling around to head back southbound.
Okay. So, but Keno Springs is to the north of his property. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And so he indicated he thought they were doubling back to head southbound again,
Yes, ma'am.
but you're not sure about that. Is that what you said?
Exactly.
Oh, you're not sure of the exact words.
Yes, ma'am.
It was either doubling back or circling back, one or the other.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So after this phone call, what did you do next?
So this time I called the station back again to update them, let them know that at this time I was able to speak with him. He's okay. And that he didn't see any firearms at the time.
So other than him saying that he heard a gunshot and his initial statement that he was being shot at, that he retracted in the second call, did he ever say he saw any firearms in these 2 phone calls?
No, ma'am.
Did he ever say he saw anyone point a gun at him?
No, ma'am.
And then during the second phone call, if I understood you correctly, he initially said he'd been shot at, but the second time he said, no, he'd just heard a gunshot.
Yes, ma'am.
And after you touched base with your supervisors, anything else happen following this call?
Upon reporting everything to my supervisor in person, then we reported it to his command staff as well.
Okay. Other than that internal reporting that happens within the department, anything happen substantively with Mr. Kelly?
No, ma'am.
As far as you know, were agents deployed out to the scene?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, on the second phone call, BPA Tercey actually relayed to me that at least two agents were responding, as well as the sheriff's department.
Okay, so when you spoke to them during the second call or after the second call?
During the second call.
So during the second call with Mr. Kelly, that's when Tercey told you there were agents responding?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Were you aware of what happened at that time, or is that the end of your part?
That was the end of my part in that situation.
What did you do after that?
So after relaying everything to my command staff and my supervisor's command staff, then I proceeded to return home.
So you went off duty?
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
And do you keep your ranch liaison phone with you even when you're off duty?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you do that on this occasion?
I did, yes.
Is that the phone that Mr. Kelly was calling you on, just to be clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall the phone number for that phone?
I believe I do have it wrote down. I don't know if I can, but I think it's 520-470-9365. I believe it's been so long since I've had that position or used that phone. I believe that's it.
Okay. So tell us what happened next with respect to this case.
So at approximately 4:23, I'm at the gym in Green Valley, and that's when I receive another phone call from Mr. Alan Kelly. This time it's from a number that's under my contact saved as Alan Kelly.
So the first call that you had was not a number that you had under your contacts, but you recognized his voice. And then when you called him back, did you call him on the number you have or the number he called you from? If you recall.
I don't recall.
Okay. So third call for sure, that call's coming from the normal number you have in your contacts for him.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And tell me about that call. What did Mr. Kelly tell you?
This phone call, he was calm now, and he immediately thanked us for our responsiveness, the agents responding, the sheriff's responding as well. He was just kind of expressing his gratitude for the quick response to his property after the incident.
And what was his demeanor like on this call?
It was the normal Mr. Kelly that I've always dealt with. He was pretty calm.
And when you started, did he start to talk to you some more about what happened that day?
He did. Typically, when there is a situation, no matter how minor it is, if there's a cut in the fence or something like this, I always try to meet with the ranchers or the property owner the next day or when feasible. I'm just to kind of talk everything over in person, or if there's something I need to fix, I'll be there in person to do it. So we had talked about meeting up the following day to discuss the situation, and then he immediately went into discussing the incident.
And when he started talking about the incident, what was his demeanor like at that time?
He got a little more amped up, a little more kind of adrenaline filled, a little more excited, I guess.
Did you previously describe him as super excited and sort of rambling on?
Yes, ma'am.
And would that be accurate?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did he tell you about what had happened earlier during this conversation?
So at this time, he had stated that him and his wife were sitting inside their home, and they heard what sounded like a gunshot. He went to his back porch and he saw his horse frantically running by. This is when he observed at least 10 subjects walking with packs, and they all had, he stated, AR-style rifles. He stated that his wife had seen it too, as well. At least 10 subjects walking towards Keno with AR-style rifles and packs.
And did he say anything about what he was describing these individuals as?
He described them as drug mules.
And then at some point, did he give you a different number than 10 subjects during this call?
State that again.
Did he give you an even larger number after he originally told you 10 subjects?
He said approximately 10 to 15.
10 to 15? And he said they were all carrying AR-style rifles?
Yes, ma'am.
And what's Mr. Kelly's wife's name?
Wanda?
Could you take a look at that and see if I've accurately summarized your statements there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so I want to walk through this with you. So on this occasion,
I hear Candy again today, but I don't see the culprit.
he didn't say he's getting shot at and he's shooting back. He says he's inside the house when he hears a gunshot. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And he also says that it was at that point that he goes outside and sees the horse running by.
Yes, ma'am.
And the first time you talked to him, he said 5 subjects, but the next time you talked to him, he said 10 subjects and then 10 to 15, all loaded down with AR-style rifles.
I think it's Mr. Kelly. I just saw him put a baggie down, and now his jaw is moving. Not a lot, but people don't just sit there and move their jaw. Well, maybe some people do. I think it's Mr. Kelly anyway.
Yes, ma'am.
Is this the first time that he told you that he saw rifles?
Yes, ma'am.
The voice that you heard on this phone call, was it the same voice you heard on the 230 and the 236 phone calls?
They're pretty similar. Yes, ma'am.
So I guess my question is, I know that the demeanor's changed, but was it the same person on all 3 phone calls?
Yes, ma'am.
And you recognized the voice?
Yes, ma'am.
So after this phone call, what's the next thing that you did?
I proceeded to go in the gym and complete my workout.
So you went from this phone call, where were you when you took this phone call?
In the parking lot of the gym.
And you were off duty, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And so then you headed on in the gym, and then what's the next thing that happened related to this case?
At approximately 5:20 something, I think it was 5:35 when I noticed that I was completing my workout. I was putting the gym equipment away. I thought I heard my phone alert. So I went over to my phone to check it out, and I saw a missed call from Mr. Kelly, as well as a text message from Mr. Kelly. Text message stated, call me immediately. And there was also a voicemail from Mr. Kelly as well.
So you missed a call and you missed a text message, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And does 5:23 sound like the correct time for the missed call?
Yes, ma'am.
And does 5:26 sound like the correct time for the missed text message?
Yes, ma'am.
We also want to see,
There are 2 exhibits in front of you now. Could you first take a look at Exhibit 60.1, State's Exhibit 60.1? Do you recognize that?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And what does that appear to be?
A screenshot of a phone log.
And is that the text message you just discussed a minute ago?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then Exhibit 59, do you recognize that? And I said 523, but that was a 526 text message, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And then could you take a look at item 59? Do you recognize that?
Yes, ma'am.
And how do you recognize it?
I actually listened to it and signed the thumb drive for the voicemail of Mr. Kelly that I left on my government issued phone.
And does that appear to be what you signed and listened to?
Yes, ma'am.
And Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'll proceed to play the voicemail, which we're moving. I've moved in, pardon me, Your Honor, I moved for admission of States Exhibit 59 and States Exhibit 60.1.
I have no objections, Your Honor.
59 and 60.1 are admitted.
And may I publish?
Yes.
Voicemail.
Jeremy, this is Alan Kelly. You need to call me immediately. This is serious. Call me immediately. I can't say any more over the phone. Bye.
And does that accurately depict the voicemail message you received?
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm showing on the screen now States Exhibit 60.1. Is that an accurate representation of the text message that you received?
Yes, ma'am.
And just to verify, since I got it right, got it wrong the first time, that's January 30th, 2023 at 5:26 p.m. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you said it was about 5:35 that you noticed you'd missed the text message and the phone call. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did you do when you noticed that?
I immediately called Mr. Kelly back.
Did y'all play some phone tag?
We did. He didn't answer the first time. I proceeded to call him back again, and I believe he was calling into me, and I answered his phone call.
Tell me, when you got this call from Mr. Kelly, what was his tone like?
So now it had changed to a Mr. Kelly that I've never heard before, but now he sounded scared.
And what did Mr. Kelly tell you when you spoke to him?
So upon greeting Mr. Kelly, he pretty much right off the bat stated that this was worse than he could ever imagine.
And did he say anything else?
He said he needed agents to respond to his property, someone to meet with him. He had asked where I was, and I told him I was off duty, that I wasn't able to respond, nor is that how the Border Patrol works, but when you're off duty. But so I proceeded to tell him he sounds like he needs to be checked on, and that could send agents out there.
And when he said it's worse than he could imagine, did he repeat that a couple of times, and then did he say some other phrases as well?
He did. He had stated again that it's worse than he could ever imagine.
And did he say this is bad as well?
He did. Yes, ma'am.
And did you ask him for some details about what was going on?
I did, because I have to report to my station to get agents out there, so I want to give them the most accurate information that I can. It sounded that something had happened, so I wanted to relay to the agents or whoever was going to respond out there the most accurate information of what to expect when they get on scene. So I proceeded to ask him what was going on, if he could clarify, if he could be specific on what was worse than he could imagine.
And how did he respond to you?
He responded that he couldn't state it over the phone. He proceeded to ask if.
Okay, that part I don't get. He couldn't say it over the phone because there might be someone else around. Okay, I'm picturing what they're trying to tell me is out there, and it's like open land. Yeah, there's a tree, there's some bushes, but this is 150 yards away from the house. So no one can be like hiding around the house. They keep saying there's a tree. So I keep if there were like if there was like a tree line or a woods, no one would say there's a tree because there would be multiple trees. So who would be around? What I know the grass is like what a couple feet high. They said 1 foot, they said 2 foot, they said 3 foot. Does he think someone's like laying down around him, waiting? I mean, hiding like in the grass? Why can't he talk over the phone? Why can't he see if there's someone near him in an open field?
If any agents responded out there, if anything, they would have to report anything. I was very clear with him that ever since he called me at 2:30 p.m., I reported that. Every phone call after that was reported to the station as well as my command staff. That everything's been reported and will continue to be reported.
Did you find this unusual that he was asking you these questions?
I did, yes, ma'am.
And what was his tone like when you were having this part of the conversation?
Now his tone is kind of more cautious of what he would say, somewhat evasive.
And did that cause you concern?
It did, yes, ma'am.
Did you continue to press him for details?
I did for a few more seconds until I kind of just ran out of patience of trying to get out of so I could report accurately. Finally, he stated that something was possibly struck earlier.
And do you recall specifically what he told you?
So after he had told me that something was possibly struck, again, I tried to clarify what was actually struck. So we played this guessing game going back and forth. And at one point I had stated, was it an animal? He stated, well, you could possibly, classify it as an animal.
And was the specific phrase, you know how shots were fired earlier, something was possibly struck? Is that what he said to you?
Yes, ma'am.
And so after you continued to try to get more information out of him, you said he told you he couldn't tell you more over the phone. What did you suggest to him at that point?
So at this time I suggested that he call the sheriff's department, report that what he encountered on his property. And I told him I would call the station and have agents respond as well.
And how did he respond to you when you told him that?
He kind of just stated, okay.
Did he talk to you about who he wanted to come out to his residence that day?
He did. He did specify that he preferred, when I said about the sheriff's department, he did state that he preferred that the Border Patrol respond because he said it was a Border Patrol or a border related issue is what he had said.
And did he specifically say you need to get Border Patrol?
Yes, ma'am.
And this is a border related issue?
Yes, ma'am.
So he clearly didn't want the sheriff's department to respond. Is that right?
You stated it
Objection
was-
calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Did you, after your conversation with him, is that the end of your conversation with him?
Yes, ma'am.
And during this conversation, you indicated his demeanor was scared. Would you also describe that as nervous?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you take a look and see if I have, oh, sorry, I missed one there. See if I've accurately summarized your statements just now.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm showing you State's Exhibit 53. Is your report contained in there?
I didn't hear everything he said. I heard him before say, I didn't say something might have been struck. That's not what I said. And she replied, well, that's what he says you're going to say. And then he's upset about something, but I don't know what. I can't hear him.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And did you document the phone numbers that you received the calls from in that report?
I did not.
You also had an interview with Detective Ainsa and Detective Barba, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember relaying that information to them during that phone call or during
do.
that interview?
I do. Yes, ma'am.
I don't see it documented in that interview, do you?
No, ma'am.
Okay. You did, that is the text message you received though, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And those are the phone calls that were accurately relayed today, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And they would be, the numbers would be, the first two calls came from one number and the remaining calls came from the regular number you had with Mr. Kelly as a contact, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. That's all I had for this witness, Your Honor. Thank you.
Could you leave your exhibit up, please?
Oh, excuse me, I do have one more question for you. During the times that you'd spoken with Mr. Kelly, did he regularly carry a handgun?
Yes, ma'am.
And what type of handgun, if you know, and where did he carry it?
I don't recall the type of firearm, but he always wore it in a holster on his right hip.
Did you have some discussions with Mr. Kelly about carrying an AK-47?
One of the times, I believe, is the first time we met. Maybe he had discussed that he does routinely patrol his property with an AK-47.
And that's all I had, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Thank you.
Did you say you wanted me to leave that up?
Yes, can you please?
Okay,
Thank you. All right. Just want to make sure you heard me. Good afternoon, Agent Marcel.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Have you ever talked to me? My name is Kathy Lowthorpe, attorney.
I have not.
You never met me before this,
Oh.
other
No.
than seeing me
Guys.
maybe in
Her name is Kathy. Okay. He's innocent. Innocent. Innocent is the day he was born.
the hallway.
No, ma'am.
Okay. So to be clear, you work in a unit separate from the sheriff's department, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Just curious, when you're within the boundaries of your jurisdiction where you explained how far you go in different directions, right?
Yes, ma'am.
What if there's an incident that involves, a crime? Who has that final jurisdiction? Is it you or the sheriff's department? How does that work?
So it depends what crime it is. If it's immigration related, typically we'll take over that part. But if it's like a crime outside of that, the sheriff's department will take over. We enforce, not the same laws as the sheriff's department or local police department enforce.
You do have some separate laws that do fall in your jurisdiction, like drugs,
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
smuggling.
Yes, ma'am.
Name some of the others that you could think of.
So narcotics, smuggling, illegal entry without inspection.
Is that a crime?
It is. yes,
Illegal
ma'am.
entry?
Without inspection, yes, ma'am.
And what's an inspection?
Crossing the international boundary other than a designated port of entry.
And with the right to inspect if they do, when they come over that port of entry?
Yes, ma'am.
So when they avoid the port of entry, they're not giving you a chance to inspect.
Right.
So therefore that becomes the crime.
That becomes crime, yes, ma'am.
I get you. Just trying to follow you.
Yes, ma'am.
Are these federal or state laws?
These are federal law.
Okay. So if you get a drug trafficker, would that be a violation under federal law?
Yes, ma'am.
So you are considered law enforcement.
Yes, ma'am.
And I noticed you seem to be in uniform, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you do carry weapons
I do, yes, ma'am.
and both things that might, like guns, but also less lethal weapons, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Because you don't know what you're going to face in an encounter. Is that right?
Exactly.
Now, there's types of smuggling going on out there, isn't there?
Yes, ma'am.
What are different types?
There's human smuggling and also narcotics smuggling.
Okay. And both of them potentially are a crime,
Yes, ma'am.
federally also.
Yes, ma'am.
And we're all aware of a very, very scary drug out there called fentanyl. Are you aware of that?
Objection relevance, Your Honor. There's no indication there's any fentanyl involved in this case.
Your Honor, this is going to not only his job test, which they open the door, but to the things that he would be out there doing as a liaison and communicating to the ranchers that are along the border, things to be prepared. It goes to the state of mind of my client.
Objection's overruled.
Thank you. So you're aware of fentanyl being a very scary drug out there right now, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And is smuggling, whether it's fentanyl or other drugs, do they usually always come through point of entry, or are they avoiding those areas and coming around?
Your Honor, objection relevance and also Rule 701. She's asking for opinions of a witness that's a lay witness, and I'd like to make an argument on that.
Your Honor, he is an expert as far as expertise, knowledge, as far as him being Border Patrol. This is what he does for a living. This is the things that he advised my clients to be careful of, and the state of mind that eventually goes to my client. And so he is the perfect witness for this. This is what he does every day.
And Your Honor, this witness was not listed as an expert witness, and Rule 701 indicates that the witness's testimony has to be rationally based on the witness's perception. It has to be helpful to clearly understanding the witness's testimony or determining a fact and issue, and not based on scientific or otherwise or other specialized knowledge. This witness did not perceive anything on this occasion that has anything to do with what Ms. Lothorpe is asking this witness about.
Objection's overruled. You can ask the question.
All right, we can proceed, okay? The smuggling that's coming through, are they coming outside of where the checkpoints are, or are they also coming outside of that area?
Both.
Okay. And you're patrolling outside at this time period and acting as a liaison for information outside of the checkpoints, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
These ranchers don't live on the checkpoint, correct?
No, ma'am.
So I'm visualizing a checkpoint, a station where you go through and it allows the federal government to inspect or talk to any subjects going through, check papers, and their rights to be there. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
When you avoid that, you are potentially, like you said, breaking the law and not showing proper credentials, not allowing an inspection and things like that, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you're familiar with the area near my client's ranch, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have an approximate idea how large of a ranch he has?
I believe it's approximately between 170 and 180 acres.
Okay. And although that sounds really large, it's not necessarily one of the bigger ranches out in his area. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and are you aware that he does cattle, maybe not only his own over the years, but also takes on cattle from other ranchers?
Yes, ma'am.
And you've seen that.
Yes, ma'am.
And you're aware that he has a horse.
Yes, ma'am.
And he, over the time, you also know he has dogs, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, it's important that a rancher has barbed wire or some kind of fencing to keep their livestock in and keep other people's livestock from entering their own property, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's why you said if you had an emergency that where you guys had to, as Border Patrol, had to cut through to get to a situation, you also tried to repair that in respect of the homeowner's property, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So when someone not only comes through the property, if they're illegal, they're breaking a crime, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
When they come on a property, they're breaking a crime by trespass, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And if they're shooting on their property, that's aggravated assault, and that's a crime also. Isn't that correct?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for a legal conclusion.
Sustained. I don't know if he knows the definition of.
Do you know what an aggravated assault is?
I mean, not verbatim. I don't enforce the aggravated assault.
Okay. But is a person allowed to shoot at someone else?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And would you suspect that it's a crime?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so these three factors are being told to you that date, that there is a crime afoot on his property back on January 30th of last year, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, the things in there, just for educational, some of the things that you are aware of, again, that you may have also shared with my client. You do educate my client and other ranchers about things going on, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And would it be fair to say there's been increases of activity out on the ranchers' properties that over years have increased? Have you had a chance to observe that?
The increase in traffic?
Yes.
Yes, and both, also the decrease in traffic as well over the years. It kind of fluctuates.
Okay. And leading up into this, you made numerous text messaging and communications to my client to be careful of different activities that was going around near his property. Isn't that true?
Yes, ma'am.
And there's a bunch of text messages to prove that, isn't there?
Yes, ma'am.
And you wanted him to be safe with his wife, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that the only two people living on this property at this ranch, the Vermilion Ranch, that you're aware of?
They're the only two I'm aware of.
And it's fair to say they are senior citizens, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so they would be a little more vulnerable to things that might be going on that might be crime-like, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so you probably had some concerns for their safety, I would imagine.
Yes, ma'am.
You actually were in, really good communication with him and overseeing and looking out for him, weren't you?
Yes, ma'am.
And as it should be, right? And that's your
the
job?
Point of the detail, yes, ma'am.
Okay. But you earnestly did it with care and concern.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And then when you have smugglers, you already told us that there's different kinds of smuggler, human trafficking, drug trafficking, correct?
Yes, ma'am, as well as firearms as well.
Firearms are important. Firearms always carry some form of value, don't they?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, that's common knowledge, right?
Mhm.
And that's a yes for the court reporter, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I'm not trying to, but she needs those words.
No, I caught myself.
That's fine.
Your Honor, and can I just show a continuing objection for the record?
So noted.
Thank you.
And I would imagine in your position, all those things that you talked about, smugglers, guns, human smuggling, drug smuggling, trafficking, those are things you have encountered and have some experience with yourself, correct? Making
Yes, ma'am.
arrests?
Yes,
You
ma'am.
made arrests, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I mean, that's part of your job, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And although you're new, it didn't take long before you got acquainted with those types of things going on around you, I would assume.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And when you were doing a ride along, I would assume, were you riding along when you were on probation, or were you out on your own?
Field training unit, we were actually riding with a senior agent upon completing the field training unit, then I did ride solo sometimes with a journeyman as well.
So in the beginning, I would assume you had to ride along first, and then eventually they kind of cut you loose on still on probation. But now that you've been trained a little better, you were now cut loose to ride your own vehicles.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the terrain out there is flat, and there's also mountains, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And there's a lot of ravines, or what do you call it? Arroyos or washes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And it just covers the whole terrain, doesn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you're aware that there are cameras out there, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And was there potentially cameras in the general area that Mr. Kelly lived at?
Yes, ma'am.
But sometimes these people go undetected. How come?
They use tactics to avoid our camera systems and other detection devices.
Okay. And so how do they do that to your personal knowledge?
They'll follow low ground, washes, ravines, stay out of sight.
So cameras don't see that lower ground as well as if they're above the ravine.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the terrain is covered with these ravines, creating, almost like an anthill of pathways through this area, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, there's something also that might happen out there is, well, let me strike that. Let me get to that in a second. Is it the people that carry the backpacks, are they usually transporting items?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, again, objection. This calls for an opinion, and this witness is listed as a lay witness, not as an expert witness.
Objection is overruled.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what would you might find in a backpack with people that are coming in illegally, not at the checkpoints?
Typically food, clothing, personal belongings, identification IDs, but mainly food, clothing.
What about drugs?
Drugs, yes, ma'am.
What about guns?
Yes, ma'am.
Is a person carrying illegal activities more likely to have a gun than someone that's not illegal? Illegally committing a crime like carrying something illegal?
Objection, form of the question.
Sustain.
Let me rephrase that. If someone is traveling with illegal drugs in their backpack, would they be the one that be more likely armed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, and I'm not talking about the immigrant family that's trying to find the American dream, okay? I'm talking about smugglers at this time. So you're following me, sir?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
There's also a word out there called rip crews. What is that?
They're bandits that kind of operate to either rob migrants that have crossed the border or also steal the narcotics that are coming from rival cartels.
Okay. So not only are they out there trying to get to whatever destination for whatever profitability they're looking for, but they also have to face the potential of someone stealing from them. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And so knowing that is a possible environment, would that also be a reason why someone carrying illegal activity of some sort would want to be armed?
Yes, ma'am.
To protect themselves against other thieves?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, when people cross the border, isn't it true that they have to pay a price to get across?
They do, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what is your knowledge about that?
I've recently heard in the past year it's upwards to.
Again, Your Honor, objection calls for speculation and hearsay.
Objection's overruled. He can answer if you can answer.
Go ahead, sir.
Through what we've gathered, it's upwards of $8,000 to $10,000, depending on what country you're from, across the border.
$8,000 to $10,000 is a lot of money. Would you not agree?
Yes, ma'am.
And that would be dollars, not in Mexican money.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So it wouldn't be fun to just go over there for nothing for that much money, right? I mean, you better have a good reason to pay that kind of money. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, ma'am.
And let's talk about drugs, for example. That's a very profitable business. So it needs to be more profitable than $8,000 to $10,000 to do it. Wouldn't that be fair to assess?
that the drugs are more profitable. I mean,
Well, if someone is going to smuggle, you would hope that they are a business person to know that they're going to make more money than 8 to 10,000 if that's the fee they have to pay to get across in the first place. Wouldn't that be common sense?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, when you deal with pills like fentanyl, I mean, they are a pill form, correct? You've seen them?
I have, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so you could carry a large volume of fentanyl in a smaller area, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And are you aware that fentanyl per unit is very expensive on the streets?
Yes. I'm not. I'm not too sure.
Okay,
What the
that's
street value
fine.
is.
Just testify to what you know, sir. Okay. But eventually these drugs, whatever form, whatever type, could it be meth,
Certainly, yes, ma'am.
cocaine,
Yes, ma'am.
and marijuana?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Marijuana would take up more volume in a backpack, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
To get the large amount for profitability. But pills are smaller, or powder would be smaller and still come back with a high volume of profitability. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now they're out there. Do you also know that there are people that look out for the groups that are coming through illegally?
Yes, ma'am.
What do they call them?
Scouts.
Scouts. Okay. And what, let's talk about clothing and things that you would suspect would be dealing with this type of environment. Okay. Again, I'm not referencing anyone crossing an immigrant for the American dream. I'm talking about people that are conducting illegal activity. So would it be fair that lately the clothing attire that's common would be camouflage outfits?
So everyone that's illegally crossing without inspection, that's not giving up to the United States Border Patrol, or between narcotic smugglers and the everyday migrant, they're all wearing camouflage.
Everybody is.
Everyone.
The ones that are going to the checkpoint are?
The ones that are, well, they're usually hiding in the vehicle.
Okay. All right. And so what about binoculars? Is that a common attire for someone just looking for the American dream? Or is that someone that might be a scout that's trying to get through the border illegally?
So typically the scout wears the binoculars for both narcotics and human smuggling.
Okay. And what about the walkie-talkie?
Again, the same. They use the walkie-talkies. The scouts typically use them for smuggling humans as well as narcotics.
Okay. And of course, backpacks would be part of transporting something, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And if it's drugs, then the drugs could fit in there, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever seen the fanny packs before?
Yes, ma'am.
And what's the purpose of the fanny pack?
Typically, they're used for being that when, whether it's narcotic smugglers or human smugglers, or the migrants crossing, typically carrying a heavy load of food and clothing kind of slows you down. So when we intercept these people, they'll typically run from us. So to ditch the weight, they'll drop the backpacks, but to maintain their personal belongings like IDs, passports, money, they'll keep in a fanny pack. That way they can still run quickly without that heavy backpack of the food. They just keep the personal belongings on them.
Let's talk about the money. Everyone wants to protect their money first, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And so clothes won't matter if you have to run, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
But money might matter to that person, not to lose that money, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So it would not surprise you to know that if a person has a backpack, a fanny pack close to their chest, they could be carrying money in it, correct?
Objection form of the question.
Overruled.
Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Also, if there is a smaller quantity of drugs, like say, a bag of cocaine or a full bag of some sort of pills, that could also be protected in the fanny pack, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So You've got to know a little bit through different contacts, introduction and follow-up communication with Alan Kelly, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And he's always been very, very cooperative in assisting with information to you, hasn't he?
Yes, ma'am.
Very friendly to you.
Yes, ma'am.
He's a talker, isn't he?
Yes, ma'am.
He rambles, doesn't he?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, he's a storyteller.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. But you know, it gets lonely out there on a ranch all day long by yourself. And so he probably welcomed the communication with you. Would you say that could be true?
Certainly. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. But anytime he saw anything during the time, or at least a lot of times, he texted you and said, I see barbed wire cut on my property, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. This is the subject of a previous motion. Communications with the defendant.
All right.
This is already been open.
Let's take our afternoon recess. It's about that time anyway. I'll deal with this issue out of the presence of the jurors. We're going to take a 30-minute recess. We'll come back about 10 after 3. I'll stay here, the jury's excused, and after the jury leaves, you can step down. Certainly. Thank you.
I like these two lawyers fighting it out. I do wish, though, that we could hear the storyteller lawyer more. But
That this line of questioning not be allowed.
Go ahead.
And Judge,
go.
they're not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted in the statements. We're talking about communication that has been ongoing between Mr. Kelly and the ranch liaison. It goes towards Mr. Kelly's state of mind, and it just goes towards the general character of the communication in between Mr. Kelly and the ranch liaison. Ranch liaison is sending text messages to him, telling him to be careful, to look out for certain things. Mr. Kelly is sharing information with the ranch liaison. This is all leading up to the incident. It's illustrative of Mr. Kelly's state of mind, and the state opened the door when they entered into areas involving communication between Agent Morcell and Mr. Kelly, which they did. And in fairness, we need to be able to talk about other communication that's happened between Agent Morcell and Mr. Kelly.
The objection was made after the first question, so we really didn't get into the questioning at all. But Ms. Lothorpe, where do you intend to go with this and how far?
The other questions. Can I have the question read back to me?
Sure. And I'm talking, how far do you intend to go with this line of questioning also? But you can have it read back. Let's get it. Something about cutting fences, Denise.
He said, but at any time, as he saw anything during that time, or at least a lot of times, he would text you and say, I see some barbed wire cut on the property. Well, first of all, Your Honor, this was already asked of this witness that they do it, and there is communication to make sure that none of them have cut the wires. But this is an ongoing relationship. I'm not trying to get into personal. I'm just leading up to the events of what happened on January 30th, the communication, so I can show the state of mind, but I'm also showing the cooperation that he was calling someone that was there to protect him and the environment that he lived in. And I'm just trying to establish that, but I'm not digging really deep, just on the surface of that to inform the jurors.
Well, how deep are you intending to go with your questioning into specific statements that Mr. Kelly would have made allegedly to Agent Morcell about what was happening?
Well, actually, I would like permission from the court to go into the questions that precede January 30th of warning him of the things that he saw, or my client, but they would be literally short period of time prior to January 30th. Because this is what has put him on alert for these items. He's also the one that's educated him about the types of people that are coming through his property and around his property. And that's where he's learned it. They brought up the fact that he called them, different names. And those names came from this person as far as educating him on the environment.
I'm going to reserve ruling on a question by question basis. I have to hear the questions to know what kind of information is being elicited. The state is correct. I mean, the general rule is that any statements by a party opponent when offered by the party when offered by the party on behalf of the party is hearsay. So, but I have to hear the questions and specific questions and what's directed,
Your
what
Honor,
you're directing the witness to in the questions.
and the state did specifically object to this question. And just for the record, the state has only elicited testimony specifically with respect to this incident, the day of this incident. We did not elicit any testimony about any other statements. And I think there's sort of a rule of completeness argument being made from the other side, but we didn't go into anything except the statements from the day of the incident. And so that would not apply. And so the state is objecting to the to the question that was asked by the defense that's asking about cuts to the fence and things of that nature. Those are specifically statements by Mr. Kelly that the state is requesting to preclude, and that was the subject of a pretrial motion.
Your Honor, I will withdraw that question and only address the things that he said to my client.
All right, then we're in recess for 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
All right, let's fast forward. And then, so we got like an hour left for today, unless they take any more breaks. I don't know if they take any more breaks. See, again, I just heard someone rub a microphone, but there is no culprit. I think a camera is missing someone in the courtroom. Maybe the court reporter is this lady. She's not near a microphone though.
Thank you, everyone. Please have a seat. We're back on the record. Show the presence of counsel and the defendant and all the jurors. Here comes the witness.
Hello, witness.
Ms. Lothar, you can continue with your cross-examination.
Thank you. I'm going to rephrase my last one. We've had a break, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm going to reference some communication you had with my client in the month of January leading up to January 30th events, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
And back on January 13th, you told my client that you would pass it along, that there's been a couple of groups out there in the evening this week to the west of you. Do you remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
What's BB? Buena Vista. And you let them know through abbreviation it was closer to Buena Vista, but angling your way, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So why would you tell Alan this?
For safety concerns, if he was out there working on his property and he saw agents kind of respond in the area, he wouldn't have to give me a call wondering why agents were on his property. It's kind of just a heads up to, if he's out there, no surprises.
And if it gets close to his property, he should seek cover or safety, correct?
Yeah, or call us. If he does see them, give us a better line of travel for the group if he sees them.
And you told him there was a group of, same date, you told him there was a group of 23 and a group of 6, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you also told him some may have had narcotics, just a heads up. That was you, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And after communication back, you told him that you would check to see what was going on, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, let's move to January 16th. And you let Alan know that you wanted to give him a heads up. Agents are working a group of 12 to your east near the Tortilla Well, just in case they come west towards your place.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So in your opinion, it was close enough to know that the movement could go that way. It was enough to tell them, correct?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
On January 18th, you also told Alan, sir, there's another group of approximately 8 agents will be working east of you near our camera tower. They may turn west towards you, FYI, just FYI. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you told them after that, immediately after that, you said, since the blimp went down, traffic has increased out there.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain what the blimp is?
It was the aerostat. I don't know if you guys saw it. It was the large blimp that had cameras on the bottom overlooking Nogales.
Okay, and so that was used for surveillance?
Surveillance, yes, ma'am.
And now it wasn't there anymore? How come?
Funding. It was defunded, so they had to pull it.
Okay. So once it was defunded and the blimp was there, you made a note that it has allowed or increased more activity since then.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, on January 25th, as we're getting closer to this date, you said, sir, looks like they were working a group of 10 that entered at the end of the bollard fence. The group moved north following the fence line. That's just east of your place. Do you remember saying that?
Yes, ma'am.
What's this word? Probably the helicopter. Okay. I'm assuming this abbreviation, HELIO, is that abbreviation for helicopter?
Yes, ma'am.
Was out so long because they had a team on board looking to drop them to apprehend the group. Group was never located, though, and still outstanding.
Yes, ma'am.
It's hard to track these guys, aren't they?
It is, yes, ma'am.
I mean, they scurry pretty quick. Is that right?
We do a pretty good job, but yeah, it's difficult. Yes, ma'am.
And the response time that if you were to hear a message from a rancher needing, who's reporting activity, sometimes can take a little while, correct?
Depending on where agents are, it could just depends on where they're responding from.
Okay, so where they're responding from and if they're tied up on other calls, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I would assume that you are not overstaffed by any means. Is that a fair assessment?
It's very fair. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so you're working hard and long, and it's hard to get to every location quick enough to possibly catch some of these people that are coming across illegally, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
On January 27th, you said, just received your text for some reason. How many cuts did you have? So you have responded to information about cuts in the fence line, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you did want to know if it was your guys or was it illegals, because if it was your team, you would want to make sure it gets repaired.
Either side, if it's them or us, have repaired, but mainly if it's our guys, that way I can address it with the agents that are cutting the fence and not repairing it timely, but both.
And after communication, you told him, yeah, there has been narcotic trafficking picking up around Keno. And that's Keno Springs, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now that was, by the way, January 27th through January 28th. That's just before the events that happened. That brings us to court here today, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So you could imagine the mindset of a senior citizen couple out there knowing that there's lots of activity all around them, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you could understand the stress that it would cause a rancher out there, anticipating whether or not they could or may be in danger, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I mean, you're trained to handle it, right?
Certainly, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And not knowing his background, but definitely considering his age, that's a factor for any couple to consider. Will I be okay on my property?
Yes, ma'am.
So let's get into a little bit of January 30th then. Now, we got the chart still up there that was used for demonstrative purposes. Let's talk a little bit about that and some of the things that you wrote in your report. But isn't it true, not only did you write a report, but you were interviewed by Detective Einsa, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And would that be the gentleman at the other, what happened to the? Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you for that. Detective Einsa is at the opposite table to my right at the very end to the right, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's the man that interviewed you?
Yes, ma'am.
Did it feel like you were being interrogated?
No, ma'am.
No? Okay. So when you talked to him, did you have a report or a memorandum yet created?
Yes, ma'am.
So you had that before you talked to the detective.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you bring it with you or provide it later?
I don't recall.
Okay. And you would agree that when something happens, it's a good idea to make notes of it as soon as possible because your mind is fresh with information.
Yes, ma'am.
But you were off.
Yes, ma'am.
So you were at the gym on one of the calls, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You were checking out on another call, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You were with your family on a call, weren't you?
Yes, ma'am.
So when did you get this report created?
Approximately, I started at 0600 the following day,
Okay.
January 31st.
Okay, so you had a chance to sleep and then come back into work and do your routine, and then you sat down and made this report.
Yes, ma'am.
And then, do you know when you gave him the report, the detective?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Do you know when you were interviewed by the detective?
I don't know the exact date.
If you were to estimate, was it a few days later, a week later, 2 weeks? What would you guess?
I believe a few days.
A few days later?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you being interviewed in the interview room at the sheriff's department?
I believe so. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, the first thing we see on this illustration here at 2:30 is I'm being shot at and I'm shooting back. Is it very clear that there is a gun out there? Isn't that statement clearly telling you there is some form of a weapon out there that's shooting at him?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So there's no question in mind that there's at least one, if not more guns, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And it's very clear also that when he states I'm shooting back, as illustrated on this at 2:30 on this chart, that he is shooting at someone back, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you shoot back at something, it means you've already been shot at, usually, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And isn't that possibly considered self-defense?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You know enough to know what self-defense is, right?
Yes, ma'am.
You do have a right as an officer to apply self-defense for your own safety too, don't you?
Yes, ma'am.
Overall, the answer's in.
So I know we were questioning your knowledge of state law versus federal, and I just wanted to make sure that you understand self-defense.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And you describe this demeanor that he had at that time was what? When you got the first call?
Rushed, kind of frantic.
Now you can't see him, right?
No, ma'am.
You have no idea where he's standing.
No, ma'am.
Okay. You have no idea what he's seeing at that moment.
No, ma'am.
but definitely in some form of stress.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, if someone's pointing a gun at you, you might want to be rushed in defending yourself, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And in this rush, in this rushed moment of communicating, that's when you started hearing, "I'm being shot at."
Yes, ma'am.
Now, did you have reason to believe that the defendant was at home and his wife was at home also?
Say that again.
Did you have knowledge based on the calls that not only was Alan at home, but Wanda, his wife, was at home?
Later in after the other phone calls, then yes, he stated his wife was there.
Okay, so you did learn that.
Yes, ma'am.
And as a male, as a person of care, a husband, would not be surprised that one would want to protect his family member or his wife as well, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you would want to do the same, wouldn't you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, when you first learned, there were 5 subjects with packs running southbound. So do you know which direction that is in relationship to the house? Are you familiar with the directionality of the home to the property?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it possible that what was observed was running across the view from inside the house through the windows to the right, from left to right? Would that be southbound?
From my understanding of this home, I don't really know exactly what his house looks like, but from my understanding from the house, southbound would be towards the fence, towards the international boundary. Like, I don't know where his windows face.
Okay, so do you not know that the boundary, the international boundary, would be eastbound from the backyard of his house?
That the international boundary would be eastbound from
the
the back,
wall.
from the backyard of his house.
Yes.
So I guess I don't understand where his backyard is.
So if the window he was looking at was facing east, then southbound would be to his right.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just let's go with direction.
Yeah.
So, and again, in all fairness, you weren't there that moment, correct?
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
But you have been to the home.
Yes, ma'am.
You have been shown around the home.
Not around the actual house itself, immediate, but from the home to the barn. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you are claiming that you learned from Alan that these subjects, 5 subjects, were running southbound, and that's where we get that information, correct?
Yes, ma'am. That's what he stated.
Okay. And this is 2:30. And did you feel like he had to address the issue at hand? Was he asking for help?
He was stating a problem. I mean, he called me for a reason, so I assumed, yes, he wanted help.
Okay. Well, if someone calls law enforcement and says, "I'm being shot at," are they counting on your help?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And did you know that you've provided a business card of you as a liaison to this family for them to be able to call you at any time?
I believe I did.
And that would be your business cell phone line?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And did you later learn the number that she referenced, the prosecutor reference was Wanda's phone?
I later found that out. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. But you didn't recognize it first, but you did take the call.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Because it was a duty phone.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, did you get off and then go back on the phone with him at 2:36?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you called your station at this time or communicated with them that there was a problem on the Vermilion Ranch?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you wrote in here, well, it's being reflected that you're stating there was an altercation. That's pretty much a law enforcement word, isn't it? That wasn't his exact word, was it?
No, no, ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am.
You're paraphrasing
Yes, ma'am.
because altercation is very law enforcement, correct? There's an altercation somewhere. That's something you would write in a report, wouldn't it be?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. But somehow there was some sort of connection with a subject running towards Keno Springs. That's what is reflected on this demonstrative illustration, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, we already know that he saw something, that there was a gun, there was a shot, and that he might have to defend himself, right? So
Objection compound, Your Honor.
is it?
Overall, continue.
I'll fix it. Oh, thank you. Is it possible at this point in time, due to the stress that he's under, there is a lot of stress, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And even though you said he may have been a little bit calmer, there was still a lot of adrenaline, was your words.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that adrenaline is coming from danger or something that's causing you to rise to that level, right?
Objection calls for speculation, Your Honor.
Overruled. You can answer.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that's a word you used a couple times, isn't it? In your description.
To be clear, adrenaline?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
You testified a couple times using that word.
Yes, ma'am.
And when a person is under adrenaline, they are under anxiety, they're hyped up, their body is reacting to some form of danger, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
No doubt in your mind, I would assume that there wasn't danger in front of them. It was very believable, wasn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
You don't think he
Same.
made this up, do you?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Do you think he made it up? From your perception at the time, was it real?
I wasn't there to determine whether they made it up. I just wanted to make sure he was safe at the time. So me wondering if it was made up or I didn't care if it was real or fake. Somebody's reporting to me in a professional setting. I wanted agents out there to figure out what was going on.
Based on the tone and his reaction, did it appear to be real?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Now, you also learned that there was a horse running by and was, acting out, was upset, was bucking or doing what it did. What did you learn about the horse?
It was running by his home frantically.
Okay, frantically. And a horse wouldn't make that up, would it? A horse would be reacting to something that might be real, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, what you may or may not know was, and I don't know if you learned later or not, but there was, once the issue was addressed with the 5 running by, there was more people out east of his house.
Objection, Your Honor.
Is it
That's
possible?
not in evidence.
Sustained. Well, you can rephrase the question, but the question,
Is it
the
possible?
question is asked, the question is as asked, the objection is sustained.
Is it possible under the stress of the moment that there was more activities going on than what you are hearing?
Yes.
Is it possible, based on you not getting a visual on what he's seeing, that you don't have a good reading on what he's trying to tell you? Is that possible?
Yes.
So the fact that subjects went from 10 and then 10 to 15 could be your lack of interpreting what he's seeing, correct? Because you can't see what he's seeing.
Yes.
But I would like to know in your report, you only said 10. You never said 15. Where did that change?
Just reflecting on the situation. I'm I didn't put in the report, but pretty positive. He said 10 to 50, gave an approximate group size later.
Well, but you know how important a report is, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And it's important that you put all details in there so it could be utilized properly for investigation and then possibly courtrooms, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And is it fair to say you never noted 15 in your report?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And was it also noted in any of the communications that his wife Wanda saw these 5 people or some of or whatever running by with backpacks and guns and rifles?
It was noted in my report.
Okay. So now you have not only the Allen as a witness to what he's observing through the call, but substantiating that his wife saw it and his horse might have reacted to the same thing, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Sure makes the situation a little more real that there's 3 different sources of information that might support this, a shooting going on.
Yes,
Correct?
ma'am.
Thank you. Now, when you had the call and he thanked you, what time was that?
423.
Okay. Now, he's still a little bit excited, but a little bit calmer.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And he's thanking you for your help, isn't he?
Yes, ma'am.
He's thanking you for getting law enforcement to his property to help him, isn't he?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that sound to you like a guilty person? Sir?
No, ma'am.
I mean, he's thanking you for helping him, correct?
That
Yes.
calls for speculation.
Yes, answer.
The answer's in, overruled.
That's a stupid question.
Now, at this point in time, there is no sign of a body, right? We're at
No.
423.
No, ma'am.
Matter of fact, do you learn, because you asked to be updated, right?
Yes, ma'am.
You care about what happens to this man next to me, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And you learn that law enforcement does come out to the scene, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And they search the premises around. Are you aware of that?
Yes, ma'am.
And nothing was found,
No,
correct?
ma'am. Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And did you learn that he was cooperative with everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you learn that he went to his barn and checked on his horse and making sure the premises was still safe after this event?
No, I never heard.
Did you hear that they had to find?
How did the horse get back in the barn? Like the horse heard the gunshot or took a bullet and ran off. How did the horse get back into the barn?
Him when they got to the location. Law enforcement had to look for him a little bit.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you didn't know he came from his barn
No,
back
ma'am.
to the house. Okay.
No, ma'am.
That's fine. And his wife also was talked to. Were you aware of that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so everyone told you, or told everyone there, the law enforcement that responded, which is Border Patrol and sheriffs,
I
correct?
guess I should go back. I didn't know she was spoken to that day, if that's what you meant.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes.
We just want you to tell what you do know.
Yeah.
Thank you. But Border Patrol and sheriffs responded, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And as a team, they appeared to be working together, checked out the facility, the property. Nothing was determined, and they left.
Objection
Correct.
foundation, Your Honor.
Overruled. You can answer.
And they left, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
From your knowledge of what you inquired.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Again, you still haven't been out to this location.
No, ma'am.
And you actually haven't been out there at all since this date, right?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Alan informed you at 423 he thought they were drug mules. Did he tell you why he thought so?
They were carrying large packs.
And would it surprise you that a lot of his information about what was going on might have came through you and any other previous ranch liaison?
Yes, ma'am.
So when he responded to say that's why he thought that, it's not like he could look in the bags, right?
No, ma'am.
Okay. But since the description fit the bill of what he's learned on what drug traffickers do, it was a reasonable conclusion. Would you agree?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you inquire into any surveillance yourself to see if anyone spotted anyone?
No, ma'am.
Okay. But you're not surprised that whoever was there left and couldn't be found. Happens all the time, right?
As in the subjects?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so they get down in those ravines and it's hard to track them, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And then at 5:23, 5:26, you have an array of missed calls, but ultimately you testified you connected with Alan, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And this time he's even more frantic than before. Would that be fair to say? As far as his behavior, his voice?
I wouldn't say frantic, more just scared. If they're the same, I mean,
Could shock be part of that?
yes, ma'am.
Now, ultimately, we know there was a body found. But people don't find bodies every day, do they?
No, ma'am.
People don't have law enforcement at the house earlier report shots fired, and then there's a body, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever noticed that my client has a big tractor hoe that could dig big holes and put bodies in it? Have you seen that tractor on his
Not-
property?
I don't recall.
Okay.
Yo,
Yet there's a body found in a field, couple barbed wires fenced down, that law enforcement later get called to, and he shows them where they are, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, do you know where he was when he called you?
No, ma'am.
Do you know that he might be standing next to the body?
No, ma'am.
You don't know. If he was out there, is it possible he didn't know who was around him?
Yes, ma'am.
And that would be a reason to be very evasive and scared, not knowing if he was going to be killed next. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, there's a danger out there when you're out in a field with a dead body already and you don't know who's watching you, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And
Your
this
objection calls for facts, not in evidence.
Overruled. He can answer.
this terrain is very well heavily condensed with trees and cactuses and tall grass. And I mean, it's not an empty field, correct?
No, ma'am. It's not.
And then there's the ravines, correct?
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
And there is a ravine in this direction that if someone was hiding in there, they could very well be watching him, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Or behind the shrubs and bushes and things that's there. Someone could be out there.
Yes, ma'am.
Wouldn't that be a pretty good reason to be a little bit evasive
Yes, ma'am.
if he was out there? So you tell him, is this an animal? You started that conversation, if I heard you right earlier. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And so there's this communication of, yes, it's like an animal of some sort, right? Rather than a mineral or a vegetable, it was an animal.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you're just trying to get him to talk to you in some way that you could try to understand the nature of the seriousness of what's going on.
Yes, ma'am.
You had an idea something was definitely not good.
Exactly. Yes, ma'am.
And you now had an idea that maybe there was a body out there, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you just was trying your best to work with him to gather as much information as possible so you could help report it.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that's what law enforcement does.
Yes, ma'am.
But whatever reason, he was scared to just say, I see a dead man out here, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. But he wanted help, right?
Yes.
He left messages, call me immediately, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
He left a voice message and a text message, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Asking for help, trying to get you on the phone, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
He trusted you, didn't he?
Yes.
And he really wanted you out there, didn't he?
Yes.
But you were off, and you have a right to be off, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So the next best thing was just to get whatever you can in the way of help, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And there really wasn't anyone in Border Patrol that was available at the time, right?
No, there wasn't.
Okay, so the next best thing was to get a hold of supervisors that ultimately got a hold of the sheriff's department, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Trust goes a long way, doesn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
And this was a very scary situation. Would you agree it would have been if you saw that?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So then 535, he's hinting it is worse than he could ever imagine. This is bad. He's giving you hints that there's a problem out there, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
There's urgency to this, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Please send someone to his house. Is that a person asking for help?
Yes, ma'am.
And we see on here that you were trying to get the information, but his evasiveness is not necessarily a negative thing. But it could be for more than one reason, as you just testified to, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then who knows what he meant by asked if this was being reported. We don't know what it meant, do you? It was weird, but you don't know what he meant by that, do you?
I assume he meant, is it going to be reported to law enforcement? Like,
Well, you are
further-
law enforcement.
Well, I mean, further up my chain of command, I assumed.
Okay. But he's asking for help, so maybe he wants it. Right? You don't know, do you?
No.
Okay. So in his way, under stress, that could be him saying, get someone out here, right?
Could be, yeah.
Yes, sir. Then he says, you know how shots were fired earlier? He's referencing your earlier phone call, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And your words were something was possibly struck. Is that verbatim? Is
Did you
that
say my words? That
is
wasn't
that-
my words.
those were his?
That were his words. He
Thank
said something was possibly struck.
But you never told anyone, and when you reported this, that he admitted to striking someone, did you? These are the
Yes.
words you reported.
That's exactly what I reported to my supervisor, that he had called me stating that something was possibly struck. So he wouldn't tell me exactly what it was. So you should send agents out there. That Mr. Kelly stated something was possibly struck is what I told my supervisor.
Right. And did you later learn that those words got twisted from what you said?
No,
You don't know that?
no.
Okay. But these are your words, right? That you are reflecting from him.
Yes, ma'am.
And this is what you wrote in your report,
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
And this is what you told your supervisor.
Yes, ma'am.
And this is what you told the detective in the interview.
Yes, ma'am.
And if anything got changed from this, you don't know anything about it
No, ma'am.
because that didn't happen. That's not what you said. This is what you said, what's up on the board, right?
Yes, ma'am.
He never said, I shot or killed someone, did he?
No, ma'am.
Said he might have to in self-defense earlier, but at this point in time, he didn't say, I shot and killed someone.
No,
Correct?
ma'am. No, ma'am.
So is something was possibly struck versus your earlier testimony, something may have been struck earlier? Do you know which way it came out?
In my report, I believe I said something was possibly struck
Earlier.
Earlier.
Yes. Okay. So earlier in your mind was possibly when you got the first calls.
The 2:30 phone call. Yes, ma'am.
Now, you don't know based on what he saw when they said don't know if they had guns. Let's see, where was that? 10 subjects with, and I'm back at 423 on this illustration here. 10 subjects with packs, all with AKs, versus don't know if all had guns or AKs. Is that possible that if you didn't hear a word that it could have been miscommunicated?
So just to be clear, he stated that they had AR style rifles, not AKs.
Okay.
And also he said it was too far to tell if they had firearms at 236, if that's what you're referencing.
Yeah, but it says with packs are, so it's not AKs, it's ARs.
AR style rifles.
Okay, so at 423, that's not accurate on here.
It should state AR style rifles.
Okay, that's fine. And
Trying to fix it. Sorry. He's trying to see. He remembers it differently. He remembers being asked, "Are they armed?" And he says it's too far away to tell if they're all armed.
so when discussing whether or not they had these ARs, is it possible that he said it was too far to know if they all had ARs?
So the only discussion, I think you're mixing up two conversations here.
Okay.
At the 423, I didn't ask anything about firearms in my conversation with him. He had stated 10 subjects with AR style rifles, but at 236, for clarification purpose for reporting to the agents responding, I asked him if he saw any firearms, and he had stated it was too far to tell.
Okay, because the word "they all had firearms" been part of his communication then.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And I apologize for getting those two things. I didn't create this chart. So, okay. It's under stress, under the excitement of a phone, and you trying to listen as you're walking out of the station or whatever what you were doing. I mean, it's communication's not 100% perfect, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, we talked about Alan carrying a handgun, and you were aware of that from the very beginning in his holster, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And is it unusual for a rancher to not want to carry a handgun? I mean, there's rattlesnakes out there, isn't there?
Yes, ma'am.
There's wild coyotes and things out there, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And what if one of them tried to attack their pets? Wouldn't a farmer rancher want to protect that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so carrying a handgun is a good safety measure on a, open range ranch like that, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Then there's the other issues, of course. And later you learn from him that he started carrying his long rifle, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
But that goes with all the information that there's a lot of activity out there, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Now, with technology nowadays, more and more agencies are given body cams and recording devices when talking to someone. In this case, there was no recording, right?
Not that I'm aware of.
Other than the voice message that we heard, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So this communication back and forth is your interpretation of what you think you heard, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you don't have a recording device to go back and verify exactly the word choice that was used.
No, ma'am.
And that you would agree that word choice can be very important to change a meaning, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Pass the witness.
Redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Agent Morcellett, I want to start with that statement at 236 that we're talking about. Let's talk first generally. While these events were happening, what were you doing to document the phone calls? Anything?
It wasn't until later, I believe, when they discovered the deceased individuals, when I started taking down notes.
So you were taking down notes from what happened earlier in the
Earlier
day?
in the day, yes, ma'am.
So that was that evening you took down notes?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you got the call at 2:30, the first call at 2:30, did you immediately go and talk to Agent Tercey?
Via telephone, yes, ma'am, immediately.
And would that information have gotten relayed through Agent Tercey?
Yes, ma'am.
So that information would have been documented through Border Patrol at that time in real time, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Same thing with the 236 phone conversation, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Same thing with the 535 phone conversation, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You probably didn't call anyone at 423 because there wasn't anything new to report at that time. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
And Defense Counsel asked you about your conversation, your interview with Detective Ainsa, but that wasn't the first time you talked to Detective Ainsa, was it?
No, ma'am.
When was the first time you talked to Detective Ainsa?
I believe it was that evening, pretty late at like 2200 hours.
So you talked to Detective Ainsa and you told him about those conversations at some point on January 30th, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you said 2200, are you certain about the time or is that a guess?
That's an approximation.
Okay. And so, but you did relay all those details to Detective Ainsa on January 30th.
Yes, ma'am.
So let's talk about the 236 phone conversation. Now, Ms. Lothorpe wants you to speculate about whether you missed a word in the too far to tell if they had firearms. She wants you to speculate if you said too far to tell if they all had firearms. Is the firearm issue an important officer safety issue for your responding officers?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think you would have taken care to make sure you knew whether he said they were too far to tell if they had firearms versus they were too far to tell if they all had firearms?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that a mistake you would have made?
No, ma'am.
Counsel asked you about part of the statement on the 535 call, something.
Has this guy done anything at all yet? Have we seen this guy do anything? I'm trying to remember, and I can't. What are they looking at? Is she putting different things up on the screen? His notes, is she like moving them? She must be, and we don't get to see it.
Was possibly struck. Now, I know you wrote one statement in your report and you gave us a slightly different statement during your interview. So I'm not sure which is accurate, but I want to make sure we have it in context. During your interview, you told us, you know how shots were fired earlier, something was possibly struck. Is that what Mr. Kelly said to you, or did he say something else?
That would have been the most accurate statement earlier.
So you know how shots were fired earlier, something was possibly struck.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's referring to when he said he was fired upon and he was returning fire.
Yes, ma'am.
And by that, I mean, he said, I'm being shot at and I'm shooting back.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, Ms. Lothorpe also wants you to speculate about what was happening around Mr. Kelly as he was talking to you, and whether he was whether the nervousness and the scared tone you heard in his behavior had something to do with what was going on around him. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And whether when he asked if it was being reported, if that had something to do with that. Is that what she asked you?
Yes, ma'am.
When you were talking to Mr. Kelly and he asked you, is this being reported? Was that in conjunction with him asking if you were going to send the sheriff's department out at the same time?
Yes, ma'am.
And so those two things together, what did you think he meant when he said to you, when he asked if this was being reported?
So my initial thought was,
For speculation.
Overall. Overall, it's responsive to questioning from defense counsel.
She's objecting
Do you
respectfully.
want me to ask that again?
yes, ma'am.
What did you think Mr. Kelly meant when he asked you if this was being reported?
My initial thought was, how to phrase it, if this can be like brushed under the rug, like not reported to who may arrest him for something.
And was that the implication you got from his tone and the way the conversation was going?
Yes, ma'am.
And surrounding with the details about him not wanting the sheriff's department to respond?
Yes, ma'am.
And Ms. Lothrop asked you if Mr. Kelly wanted help. He did want help from Border Patrol, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And if I understood your statements, you indicated he was reluctant for the sheriff's department to respond. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
So he wanted help from you, but not from the sheriff's department.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, Ms. Lothrop, in discussing this issue about whether Mr. Kelly was concerned while he was calling you on that last phone call, do you know where he was at that time?
No, ma'am.
Could have been in his house, could have been out of his house. You don't know. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. I don't know.
But you did know that Border Patrol had just been out there, and so had the sheriff's department just a couple of hours before, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you knew that they did a security sweep when they were out there, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you talk to me about the difference between if you're searching a property versus if you're just doing a security sweep?
So if you're just doing a security sweep, opposed to, can you say that again?
Sure. Like if you're doing an actual search of a property, like you're looking for something specific versus a security sweep to see if there's any danger.
So for the searching for something, you're going to actually, investigate, ask questions of where to look, who, when, where, why, where to, like a foundation to start from, and then kind of branch out from that. Where a security sweep would be mainly the kind of everyone moving online, pushing in one direction, kind of sweeping the area.
Just to look if there's any threat.
Yes, ma'am, for threat.
And you weren't there, so you don't know what they did while they were there, correct?
Correct.
Could have been a security sweep, could have been a search. You have no idea what they were doing.
I don't know.
Now, you know what Mr. Kelly told you that Wanda saw, but you didn't actually speak to Wanda, did you?
No, ma'am.
So you don't know what her statement is about what she may have seen and what she did not see, correct?
Correct.
So all you know is what he told you.
Yes, ma'am.
And Ms. Lothrop was asking you if you somehow thought that based on Mr. Kelly's tone, this incident was made up. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, clearly it wasn't made up, right?
Right.
Because we know there was a dead body there.
Correct.
Defense counsel asked you if you would defend yourself and your wife in this situation.
Yes.
Do you remember that question?
I do. Yes, ma'am.
If you heard a shot outside, would you leave your house with an AK-47 and shoot at people you can't see in order to defend your wife, who you left behind in the house unarmed and afraid?
Object to the question, argumented, there's facts. I'm sorry, my speaker's not on. facts not even admitted in there in this question. So, and it's calling for speculation on top of it.
Sustain.
Well, let me ask it to you this way. If you were inside your house with your wife, would you consider it to be defending yourself if you left the house to respond to a shot that was off in the distance?
I mean, I definitely would do it the safest way possible. So I'd probably remain in the home, but still take a cover and be able to still see what is out there, the threat.
Would you leave your wife behind?
No.
Now I'd like to talk to you about the January 27th and 28th conversation you had with Mr. Kelly. On that occasion, you indicated that Mr. Kelly told you he had cuts to his fence. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
So that would have just been a couple of days before this incident. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Now I'd like to talk about the Keno Springs area in general. Could you tell me in January of 2023, well, first let me back up. Could you tell me what a 1325 and a 1326 are?
So 1325 is an unlawful entry without inspection. Those crossing the border, other than a port entry. 1326 is a re-entry after you've been excluded or deported from the country prior.
Can you tell me in January of 2023, what percentage of your arrests in the Keno Springs area were related to 1325 and 1326 or illegal entry?
I'd say probably for physical apprehensions, probably upwards to 98% apprehensions of 1325 and 1326 opposed to other apprehensions, narcotics. So the majority was 1325, 1326.
So 1 to 2% of your apprehensions in Keno Springs in January of 2023 were drug apprehensions.
Correct.
Ms. Slowthorpe asked you about rip crews, and you explained a little bit what a rip crew is. When's the last time you saw a rip crew in Keno Springs?
I couldn't tell you the last time we've seen a rip crew in Keno Springs.
More than 10 years?
Yes, ma'am.
Where do you see rip crews?
Predominantly on the west side of Nogales, Arizona, like far west, the mountain ranges out towards Arivaca.
In fact, you worked on a flex crew that worked in that area. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
So rip crews, we don't see in Keno Springs. We see them west of I-10
They
or
typically,
west of I-19.
yes, ma'am. They typically operate kind of further out, away from town.
Let's talk about AK-47s and other AR-style rifles. When's the last time you saw an AK-47 or an AR-style rifle in the Keno Springs area?
It's been 10 plus years probably since we've physically seen them out there, or like north of the fence, north of the boundary.
Through the boundary, what do you mean?
Like in the United States, not in Mexico.
Okay, so 10 plus years since you've seen them north of the border.
Yes, ma'am.
You see them across the line, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
If you did see a rip crew or some kind of cartel hit, do you see a one shot from far away, or do you see a different kind of scenario?
No, typically,
Calls for speculation.
Your Honor, this is directly in response to what counsel asked.
Overruled, he can answer.
no, typically when we see the victims of a rip crew, it's multiple gunshot wounds, multiple shell casings in the area.
And if there's a hit on someone, do cartels try to make a statement?
Yes, ma'am.
And what kind of things do you see when they do that?
I mean, they try to take out everybody they can in that group, I guess, if that's what they're pursuing.
Would you typically see one shot to the back in a cartel hit?
No, so the rip crews that we predominantly see are those stealing loads from other cartels. It's usually not like a hit per se on a person. It's a robbery gone bad, whether they use their guns or not.
Do we see hits on cartel members from other hits in the United States?
Yes, ma'am.
And where do we typically see those?
Cities,
Do we see them very often?
not very often.
Do those typically happen south of the border?
Yes, ma'am.
And if you're going to see a hit on someone, is it going to be one shot from far away?
No.
They're going to make a mess,
Right.
correct?
It's usually making a statement.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about, I think you covered this pretty well earlier, but we talked about backpacks. And I think I understood you to say you see the same type of clothing and backpacks for both folks who are traveling here, as the defense said, for the American dream versus folks who are transporting drugs. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
So you couldn't tell anything based on the clothing. Is that right?
No, ma'am.
And the fanny packs. Does everyone carry their fanny pack in the same fashion?
No, ma'am.
So I think counsel said something about people carrying their fanny pack close to their chest. Does everybody carry it that way?
No, ma'am.
What types of ways do you see people carry their fanny pack?
Depending on the condition, sometimes the strap breaks, they have it tied around their waist. They do have it kind of strapped here, kind of have it slang like a satchel, tossed on their back, carrying in their hand in numerous ways.
So lots of different ways.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, counsel asked you about radios. So we talked about scouts having radios. Are there sometimes folks who are just crossing, again, for the American dream, that part of their payment is that they carry the radio and they get people to the pickup location?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that pretty typical?
It's more common for the scout to carry the radio, but yes, we have seen somebody dedicated in the group for either a discount or, we do see a normal person in the group carrying a radio occasionally.
And I used a phrase that I didn't ask you to explain. Could you explain to the jury what a pickup location is?
It's where the groups or the narcotics are loading into a vehicle to continue further into the United States. So they hop the fence, they're on foot, they trek north to a designated location, to some sort of vehicle or house. But usually a pickup location is being picked up by a vehicle to be transported further north.
And you said backpacks, if I understood you correctly, those could be used for drugs or they could be used for food and clothing, et cetera. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And so if you found a backpack with food and clothing in it, is that necessarily exclusive of drugs?
No, ma'am.
They keep them together in the same backpack?
The drugs and the food,
Right, that's what I'm asking.
it Typically, it's separate. The food's in a separate bag than the drugs.
So if you've got a backpack with food and clothes, that's probably not a drug backpack. Is that what you're saying?
More than likely, no.
You missed something. I just don't know what it is.
Thank you, Your Honor. That's all I had.
Are there questions for this witness from the jurors?
I want to know what they're saying. Let's go. Is it that complicated of a question? It's probably like, what's for lunch?
The question from the juror, and the juror phrased it, if this is an appropriate question, was, does Mr. Kelly wear prescription glasses for nearsightedness? And if yes, was he wearing them at the time of the alleged shooting? And question mark, and does Wanda, Mrs. Kelly? So this witness was not present at the time of the shooting and did not meet with Mr. Kelly on that day in question, so he would be in no position to be able to answer whether or not Mr. Kelly was wearing them at the time of the alleged shooting. It's a good question. It's a very good question. Well, I do think there are other witnesses who are likely to testify who would have more personal knowledge about about Mr. Kelly's glasses, why he wears glasses and what he wears them for, and maybe even whether he was wearing them or not at the time he had contact with law enforcement in the day in question. So good question, but we're going to hold it off in abeyance. I think there are the people who can answer it better. Right. No, good question. I'll give the question to the jurors. Did I miss anybody? Are there any other questions from any of the jurors? Seeing none. Sir, you can step down. Thank you very much. I think it's, well, let's get on here real quick.
So that's it. He's gonna say we'll meet tomorrow. He doesn't say anything else today. So we will meet tomorrow. I don't know if we'll meet tomorrow. I'm gonna get this out as soon as I can, guys. But I thought that was a pretty interesting day. I was hoping to hear from him sooner rather than later because he seemed to have the most information about what actually happened that day. Because he's trained to remember things like that. And I know as a jury member, you're not supposed to put more weight on what a law enforcement officer says over a different witness. I know this. I know we have biases towards police officers. Some of us feel like, they're right and other people are wrong. Other people are certain anything a cop says is a lie and never believe them. We all have biases against police officers in general, but um, just my personal opinion is he remembered what happened that day. Um, he wrote it down. He told other people. So that doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything about anything. Just remember, just that he remembers words that were said, and we don't know anything yet. They could have been carrying guns. They could have shot him. Somebody in his gang might have wanted his money or whatever. Who knows? We have no idea what happens. We have no idea yet. We need more information. Like, who in the heck is this guy right here? And what is he doing there? Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. I will get day 3 a.m. out as soon as possible, and I will see you later. Bye, guys.